Today I want to talk about an extremely interesting paradox that I have been thinking about all day. It's very interesting. So the idea is basically that when we watch TV and we watch YouTube videos and anything like that about people doing some form of job. I was watching Suits tonight. I don't know if anybody has watched that show, but it's about lawyers, right? Law firm. Very interesting job. Cool things happen, and it seems like a really cool profession from watching the show, right? But it makes me think about how everything that's portrayed on TV is only the 5% most interesting parts that happen in that job. So for example, Suits, cool. It's a show about lawyers, a law firm, okay? I'd imagine that the job isn't as interesting as the show makes it out to be. I'd assume it's a lot more stressful. I'd assume there's a lot more boring, busy work. And I assume that stuff we see on the show, this part that actually interests us, is probably only 5% of the time. And so that leaves the other 95% of the time is what reality more is like in that sort of industry, right? And we could all probably agree that lawyers make a good amount of money, a lot of money. It's one of the stigmas, doctors, lawyers, they make a lot of money. And yet only the 5% that people associate with it is what you see on TV. And it's the same of content. If you upload videos about literally anything, the only thing you're going to upload is the most interesting parts of it, because if you show all of the boring parts, which is a majority, by the way, if we use Suits as an example, if only 5% of the things that happen are what are showed in the show because that's the most interesting part, then really the job is the 95% of things. Because if you didn't have those 5% of things, then you'd still be left with an overwhelming majority of the job. So most of the work gets done and most of the progress is made when there's that 95% boring part that nobody wants to see. But nobody ever sees those parts because it's boring and nobody wants to watch it. And so those are the parts that we're all ourselves left to sit with. And it's no wonder that there's this never-ending paradox where on TV and on social media, you see only the 5% most interesting part of the job that happens. And then you associate that with the job. And then you expect when you get that job that 5% is what the job's going to be like. And then you think that the job is boring. And then you have to learn over time that 95% of the job is just boring stuff that nobody sees online. And then maybe one day you make content and then you try to make content about the whole job and nobody finds it interesting. And so then you only post the 5% that is interesting and it performs. And so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy of you think it's entertaining, so you do it. You realize it's kind of boring. And then you yourself start posting the stuff that's boring and nobody sees it. So then you start posting the stuff that's interesting and people see it. And then those people then think that it's only the 5% is most interesting. That's what it's like. And then the cycle repeats. And so we're in this repetitive cycle of misaligned expectations because we only see the 5% of the most interesting parts, the best parts. We don't see all the bad and the boring. And then we ourselves go into it thinking that 5% is reality. And it's misaligned judgments, and then it takes our own experiences to realize what reality is, and then we just copy the people that did previously because the only way to get something to work is if it's actually interesting. And this is only relating to content and TV, but I just thought it was an interesting paradox, because if you're watching a TV show like Suits and you want to be a lawyer and you think that that's what it's going to be like, and then you go and become a lawyer and you realize that that's not at all what it's like, maybe 5% of the time, and then one day you decide you want to start creating content or you want to produce a TV show about lawyers or a law firm, and then you realize that, oh, well, I'm not going to be like them. I'm going to be unique and I'm going to show all the parts, and then it doesn't perform because the people only like the 5% that's the most interesting, and then so inevitably you revert right back to producing the 5% that is most interesting, and you then become the person who got you into it in the first place. And so that's a really cool thing in marketing that you see all the time is why doesn't anybody innovate or change? Well, there's some things that are forever going to stay the same that are just laws of marketing, right? Of any sort of thing, but marketing is what we're talking about here. And so you wonder why some people don't innovate with some things, or why the same ads work or the same things work, and why people do the same things over and over and over again. Well, it's because they think the same way that we do, and they're like, oh, well, I'm going to change this. I'm going to do something different because I'm going to set myself apart. And then they do it, realize nobody's interested in that, and then end up doing the thing that they renounced that they were ever going to do. And that's just how it works. I found it very interesting. So yeah, that's a cool lesson for the day. I don't know what I would call it, but it's basically just a paradox of misaligned expectations with content creation. So when you watch TV, You think that it's one thing, then you do it, you realize it's another, and then you're like, oh, I'm going to change it, I'm going to be unique. And then you do that, realize it doesn't perform, and then just go back to what everybody else is doing. And I think there's two sides to this. One side could be argued that that's the right way to do things because, like I said, some things don't change. But I also think that people use this as an excuse. They use this as an excuse that, hey, this isn't going to change, therefore I'm going to do what everybody else is doing, without actually analyzing if it is possible or trying in the first place. And so with a lot of different things, a good example that I'll use is like typical marketing, like using open loops to get people to watch throughout the video. And people just do that, like psychological marketing, because it's worked. And they just assume that, well, everybody's already done it. And then people have tried to innovate and then realized that it didn't work and then just reverted back to it anyway. So I might as well just skip that cycle completely and just start with it and then save so much time. But then you realize that, well, maybe if instead, which I'm not saying this works, this is just an idea, what I'm trying to do at least, is maybe I'll try and present all of the value in the video at the beginning so that the people actually feel like they trust me, and then they'll want to stay. So it's like retention hacks. Open loops is like the retention hack, is you open a loop and people aren't satisfied until you close it later in the video. It's like the two most important things you say at the end because people will wait in anticipation. But what if you just gave them the value up front and you change it from anticipation and a hole inside of them to a genuine interest because you pique their interest? So it comes back to the same idea. Is like, then I test that out and it either does or doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, then I just go back to the open loops that everybody else is doing, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the difference is sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't, and the only way to know that it works is if it does. But I just thought it was interesting that I noticed is like the paradox is it exists, it's really cool how it works, and some people chalk it down as an excuse to not innovate. So that's just random thoughts for today. Hopefully you can use this in some sort of way, or opens your mind, or maybe you just find it interesting. It could be completely useless, but yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow.